Greetings, guys. It's Jurgis. Hope you're doing well. I recently received some correspondence from two different gentlemen, and after responding to them and their questions and their concerns or their observation, I decided to maybe talk about it because I think I can relate to both situations, although they're different. In many ways, they are the same. And I thought it might be interesting to share with you, and maybe this might affect you in your spiritual journey. Now, one is a gentleman who will be going to Mount Athos in a matter of weeks. And so, having been in Mount Athos under a short duration, as recently as this last Pascha, even though I had been there, I was still trying to get a blessing to go to different monasteries. I didn't receive a no or a yes, but my request was out there, and I didn't want to proceed on to a different monastery until I received one way or another a yes or no. So it turned out, a week before I was leaving, I believe, I finally got confirmation, yes, please come. And so I received a blessing, and I actually spent Pascha at Pantaleon Monastery, and it was an exceptional blessing to me, and I was able to explore that, or I was able to enjoy that blessing with my godson Porphyrius. And so this gentleman's like, he's getting ready to go. What should he do? Should he reach out to all different monasteries at one time and maybe get the first three that come back? And how would the other monasteries respond if he's just basically mass requesting a blessing to stay? And then he would have to apologize to the ones who might have given him a blessing. And so, yeah, I know what that's like. We're trying to plan. We're trying to do what is most appropriate. First, don't worry about it, because God has a plan for you, and whatever monasteries you apply to, and if you receive a blessing, and even if you, for some reason, even though you're supposed to have this worked out before you go, it's not quite worked out, just trust, because that's part of this pilgrimage as well, right? It's just to trust, and sometimes we need to give up control in our Western way of thinking and structure and everything, whether it's, with our family, to retirement, to our job promotions, to everything. We want to plan. Our education, our majors, we just like planning. And so this is outside our comfort level sometimes, as this individual had. And so I suggested a few monasteries you might consider that might be a blessing. So maybe that was part of the process with him as well, as my communication with him. He's progressing, he's walking forward, and I'm sure he'll have a blessed visit, pilgrimage, regardless of the way he's feeling now in terms of the uncertainty of it. The second gentleman is someone who he's discovered Orthodoxy through a number of different ways. God has impacted his life and brought him to Orthodoxy. He travels to Eastern Europe, he goes to monasteries, and he seems to have, in many ways like myself, a very positive, powerful experience. And the one thing that he is finding an obstacle to is, in Orthodoxy, there are many ethnic churches. So whether it's Russian, Greek, Serbian, Bulgarian, there are just different Orthodox churches, and often they're associated with a culture, an ethnic group. And because of what's happened in the Eastern Europe, not just since the fall of the Soviet Union and communism, but before with the Ottomans, there's a history in which people have had to come together and to identify as Orthodox to, protect their way of lives and their faith. And so as Westerners, as Americans, as Englishmen, we're going into Orthodoxy not really having that background. And as we come into Orthodox, we're like, what's all this about? After I got my first blessing to go to Mount Athos, I think you shared my first video, as a Protestant, God just opened doors, and I had basically got the blessing. I discovered Mount Athos after booking a trip, so it was it was a very unfolding in front of my pilgrimage. Things were happening that, I just had to trust and walk. And so as I was going through Orthodoxy and got my blessing to go to Mount Athos, I remember thinking, okay, I've never been to an Orthodox church before. I've seen them. I wonder what it would be like going inside. And here it is, I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to at least know what I'm going to be walking through or into on Mount Athos. And so I went to an Orthodox church that was closest to me, only a few miles up the road. And I went in it and I experienced it and I talked with a priest. And it was a good foundation, because I think I'd actually told the priest later on that, and other people, that, I was blessed to be able to go to an Orthodox Church of America, an OCA church, that's close to my house, because it made it more comfortable for me. I don't know how my pilgrimage, my progression would have done if my only option was, whether it's a Greek church or a Russian church in which part of the service is in a different language. I don't know how I would have adjusted with that being a Protestant. And so, of course, God blessed. God brought me to the church I needed to be at to continue on my pilgrimage into Orthodoxy. And so to this gentleman, I would say the same thing. In Galatians 3:28, it says, there is neither Greek nor Jew, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male or female. And so oftentimes, when we read that scripture, why aren't you doing what Galatians is saying? And so when we look at the different Orthodox churches that are now in America, I think we oftentimes need Galatians 3 to apply to us as we evaluate. There's neither Greek nor Jew. There's neither slave nor free, male or female. So I need to absorb that as I look at these different churches, instead of perhaps me from my own American Western perspective saying, why are you being like this? I need to look at myself and say, why am I allowing this to be an obstacle if I believe what Galatians is telling me? And I do. So we need to step out in faith that God has drawn us there, and oftentimes not let our own prejudice or nationalistic tendencies impede us, and we're letting that keep us from progressing. I started out my pilgrimage, my first as a Protestant, through an Orthodox OCA church, Orthodox Church in America. And so I went there. And again, I told you, I'm grateful that is the first step God provided. Now, as I continued my growth, my pilgrimage in Orthodoxy, God has taken me to a different church. And so I remember, and you might remember from my experience in Mount Athos my first time, I met an individual, a man who had been there for 60 days, a young American who was born in Serbia, came to America as a youth with his family, as a baby with his family. He was the first Serb that I've ever met in my life. I've never experienced, to my knowledge, someone who identified as Serbian. And God brought this individual into my life while I was on Mount Athos, not knowing, that I would meet him. And he took me under his wing, and he helped me in many, many ways. And so today, I attend a Serbian church. So again, I never would have thought that would be something that would be open to me, okay? But I'll also tell you that it's a Serbian church in downtown Kansas City. It's a very urban church. It's called St. Mary of Egypt. And my priest is a African-American, a black man, who has no Serbian involvement as well. He was born a Protestant. He came, God brought him into the Orthodoxy, became a deacon as a Serb within a Serbian Orthodox church here in America, and now he's a priest. And so oftentimes we actually not just deal with our prejudices against questioning whether we should attend a Serbian church or a Russian church or a Greek church. We actually look at the churches as individuals, wondering if it meets our standards, if it meets what we would expect. We're a place where we're comfortable in the neighborhood. And God forbid, God forgive us for that kind of tendency as well, as we do when we look at churches and say, I have an issue with them because they're ethnically not as diverse. Well, God forbid if going to a church by saying, well, this is in a more rough area of town, I'm not sure. But I will say that because the Serbian church here in America, they were open to looking at this individual, not from an ethnic perspective, but from one who can minister and grow the church within the United States. We're all have our own blinders and our ability of looking straight in front of us sometimes. And we're not looking at what is to our left and to our right, the full vision that perhaps God sees. So I would say to both individuals, trust God. Trust the Holy Spirit is working. Trust that we need to continue stepping out in faith. Trust that we don't know as much as we sometimes think we know, and I'm guilty of that. And that we need to trust and stop planning our lives as much spiritually and let God reveal himself, let God be God, let God open doors. If God has brought you to Orthodoxy at this point, or you have an interest in it, trust he can go the further way. That regardless of the church you might go to, whether you might initially think it's your preference, just trust God can bless in all circumstances. So I wanted to touch bases because I've experienced these things as well. And maybe you've experienced them wherever you are. Orthodoxy has a blessing throughout certain parts of the world in terms of expansiveness and growth, but it's also happening here in the United States. So I have a priest that I go to church in a Serbian church, downtown Kansas City, St. Mary of Egypt, a priest who is black, a priest who has 8 children, a very racially diverse congregation, also one socioeconomically diverse, also very hipster. But then I also have a spiritual father in the mountains of West Virginia. And so God has brought people that I never would have thought into my life to be a spiritual father and also to be a priest in my local area and to have the richness of seeing God work. And so I'd say have our expectations that God will continue to work in your life, be faithful, follow, and don't put barriers up that aren't there, or if they are there, oftentimes they're built on our own sinfulness or perhaps prejudices, and walk forward. Trust God that you'll get a blessing to the monastery you need to go to on Mount Athos. Trust God that he'll open the door to the church that you need to go to, and just trust. And so hopefully you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you on the next Orthodox Gardener.